Welcome to Get Into the Act. I'm your host, John Berg, with the Sacramento County Office of Education. Get Into the Act is a series of video presentations brought to you by the California Department of Education's Middle and High School Improvement Office. Renowned educators who are passionate about student learning and achievement will share research-based strategies to help middle grades teachers ensure success and close the achievement gap for their students. Each presentation focuses on one or more of the 12 Taking Center Stage Act 2 recommendations. Dr. Douglas Reeves is the founder of the Leadership and Learning Center. He has worked with education, business, nonprofit, and government organizations throughout the world. The author of more than 20 books and many articles on leadership and organizational effectiveness, he has twice been named to the Harvard University Distinguished Authors Series. Dr. Reeves was named the Brock International Laureate for his contributions to education, received the Distinguished Service Award from the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and was awarded the Parents' Choice Award for his writing for children and parents. This is the first session of a four-part series of videos by Dr. Douglas Reeves. In this video segment, Dr. Reeves will be focusing on rigor in the classroom, with a particular concentration on expectations, standards, and the culture of achievement.
Let's begin with our fundamental focus, which is closing the achievement gap. Now, the chart that you see before you is the typical scenario. Indeed, it's been typical since the 1960s, when the measurement between student poverty, represented on the horizontal axis, and student proficiency on the vertical axis, was first measured. And as you can see, the line goes straight down. Essentially, that line says, don't even bother taking the test, because when r squared equals 0.75, we've got a 75% chance of telling you what your test scores are going to be just based upon your poverty level. Fortunately, that doesn't have to be the case. Take a look at this chart, representing a synthesis of tens of thousands of students. It's the same axes, with the horizontal axis representing poverty, represented by free and reduced lunch eligibility, and the vertical axis representing student proficiency. But what do you notice? A flat line.
Meaning that you can't predict what student test scores are going to be based upon what their poverty level is.
Now, colleagues, I know you get a steady drumbeat of how important outside forces are, and I'll never tell you that poverty is unimportant, that housing, that nutrition, that healthcare are unimportant. But what does this chart say? It does not have to be determinative. What you do as a classroom educator and school leader makes a difference. We can close the equity gap. In fact, we are closing the equity gap. Let's begin with one of the signal studies of the last 10 years, the 90-90-90 studies. Now, I'm the guy who wrote those. You may have heard them tossed around a little bit, but let's just talk carefully about what they mean. These were studies of schools that were 90% poverty, 90% minority enrollment, and 90% or more of students meeting or exceeding standards. The original study is more than 10 years old, and every year we update it and add new ideas and new schools. But it's certainly not fancy. And don't let anybody tell you that there's some secret of the 90-90-90 schools. Since I first wrote that study, it's free. You can download it today. And here's what you'll learn. There are simply replicable professional practices that work in high poverty and in low poverty schools. Here are some that you might want to consider. First of all, a laser-like focus on achievement. You know, in these schools, that's all they talk about. It's the focus of every faculty meeting, every department meeting, every informal meeting. We focus on achievement. It's on the wall, it's in the trophy case. Student achievement is their mission. They have collaborative scoring. In other words, just as teachers need to agree on discipline and norms in the classroom, they also agree on what proficiency means. It's not the luck of the draw. Every teacher says that the same academic requirements are important. They give students multiple opportunities for success. In the 90-90-90 schools, the consequence for failing is not failing. The consequence is more meaningful than that. The consequence is doing it again. Don't think that you've got high rigor because you give F's or zeros. High rigor means that you make students do the work. And trust me, from a teenager's point of view, it's a lot more threatening to do work than it is to simply take a 0 or an F. The 90-90-90 schools have a consequence for failure, but it's not an F, it's not a 0. It's hard work by the student and the teacher. Here's one you may not expect. In the 90-90-90 schools, they do more nonfiction writing. Yes, there's plenty of time for poetry and fiction and fantasy, but you want to know what we found? There was a 90-to-1 ratio of poetry and fantasy and fiction in some other schools compared to description and persuasion and analysis. But in the 90-90-90 schools, they focus on nonfiction writing literally in every grade. And finally, they use data as a treasure hunt, not as a witch hunt. The whole concept of using data is never to embarrass you, to humiliate you, to compare you to colleagues. It's a treasure hunt to find why your successful practices are successful and then enable you to replicate them throughout the school. Now let's talk about the power of your expectations. Now, expectation theory has been around a long time, and you've heard of the Pygmalion effect. Remember that research at Harvard in the 1960s where Rosenthal said to one group of teachers, "You've got the fast kids," and to another group of teachers, "You've got the slow kids." Well, thank goodness we don't do research like that anymore, but you remember what happened. When you expect more, you get, that's right, more. When you expect less, you get less. And we know that it applies to students. But let me share with you an interesting graph of brand new research from 2,000 schools and 1.5 million students that I completed that will tell you the Pygmalion effect is as powerful for adults as it is for students. Check this out. The vertical axis represents the percent of students who are proficient. And on the left-hand side, we simply asked teachers and leaders, what do you think causes student achievement? On the left-hand side, they said, well, nothing I can do about it. It's a Title I school. Nothing I can do. They're not speaking English at home. There's nothing I can do. They didn't come well enough prepared. And on the right-hand side, they said, we cause achievement. It's teaching. It's curriculum. It's feedback. It's high expectations. It's everything that we do in our professional careers. We know now in the 21st century, 45 years after Rosenthal's Pygmalion effect studies, that when you expect more, you get more, and when you expect that you are the agent of achievement, then it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Pygmalion effect is not just about expecting more out of students. It's about expecting more out of yourself. In fact, the latest data on that study show that teachers who have the belief that they influence student achievement had 3 times greater gains at elementary and middle and high school levels than those teachers who believed that student demographics were the main cause of achievement. Now let's turn our attention to power standards. One of the most frequent complaints I hear from educators in California and all over the world is not we lack the energy, we lack the will, we lack the intellect. It's, Doug, we don't have the time. And you're right. You've seen the same studies I have that says if we were to really cover every single standard, we'd need a 400-day school year. And as near as I can tell, you don't have that. So let's think thoughtfully about how we can use power standards to focus on what's most important in the classroom. We begin by simply acknowledging what you and I know to be the truth. We can't do it all. In fact, we don't do it all. Anybody who claims to cover every jot and tittle of every standard is engaged in fantasy. We know that there's only 2 choices. Curriculum by default, when we run through the spring and then run out of gas when the kids finally leave, deciding then what we don't cover. Or curriculum by design, thinking right now, which standards are most important? The question is, how do you know? Fortunately, the criteria for power standards tells us how to choose what's most important. There are 3 criteria. Leverage. Which standards have more influence on other standards? For example, when you do more nonfiction writing, it doesn't just help English language arts, it helps math, science, social studies. When you work in math on tables and charts and graphs, it doesn't just help math, it helps science and social studies. Find the leverage. Secondly, what has endurance? What's going to last more than 1 nanosecond after a state test? What's going to be the thinking and analytical and reasoning skills, inferential skills that will carry your students for years ahead? In addition to leverage and endurance, ask what's essential for the next level. In fact, try this experiment with your colleagues right now if you want. If I ask you, what are you going to give up? You may say, Doug, I can't give up anything. Everything's important. Let me ask you a different question. If I were teaching in the next lower grade, could you give me some advice on what's most important for me to do with my students this year so that I can send them to you next year with confidence and success? Every time I ask that question, you don't have any trouble giving me as the teacher in the next lower grade a clear, focused, and brief list of power standards. Next, let's turn our attention to feedback and grading. Now, we know that feedback from classroom teachers is one of the most powerful influences on student achievement. And there are plenty of models of really good feedback. Think of a great music teacher. Think of a great coach. You've never seen a coach or a music teacher who, when a student makes an error, pulls out a pencil, makes a mark in a grade book, and tells the student 9 weeks later about the poor musical performance or the poor athletic performance. They give feedback immediately and specifically. And the only purpose of the feedback from the music teacher and coach is to improve student performance. I wonder what would happen if we looked at grading in the same way and stopped thinking of grading as an accounting drill and started thinking of grading as just one more form of feedback with the one and only purpose of improving student performance. So, let me ask you this provocative question. What's the difference between a student who earns an A and who earns an F? You might even want to stop this presentation and talk about this with your colleagues. Make a list of the differences between the student who makes an A and who makes an F. Well, what did you decide? Attendance, homework, attitude, engagement, behavior, background knowledge, parental involvement, perhaps all sorts of things. But here is something that I want you to take seriously. You want to know one of the main differences between students who make A's and make F's? It's none of those things. It's our own policies. And if you don't believe me, try this experiment. I'm going to ask you to do right now what all of us as teachers do almost every day of the year, and that's calculate a grade based upon a set of marks. The set of marks that you see in the slide in front of you are real marks from a real middle school. I happen to know they're real because the young man who earns them lives at my house. So take a moment and calculate what you think the final grade is. And if you need to, please stop the presentation before you go on. Have you calculated the final grade? I'm going to share with you what 10,000 of your colleagues have done throughout North America. In fact, I've not only done this in Canada and the United States, I've done this in Latin and South America as well, and every time I get the same response that I suspect you might have had among your colleagues as well. Some people, for example, will say, well, on account of those missing assignments, the student gets an F. Others used a different scale, gave him a D. Other looked at the same kid with the same grades, awarded a C. Others awarded a B. A few even awarded an A. Every single time I do this, remember, this is the same child now, same parent involvement, which, by the way, in this case, I thought was pretty darn good. It's the same vocabulary, the same nutrition, the same background, the same attendance. All those things are the same. The only thing that changed was our policies. And we got an F, D, C, B, A. If that was your own child, how would you feel? With the same performance ranging from failure and course repetition and disappointment all the way to honor roll grades, you'd know it's not a fair system. And yet that is exactly what we have right now. So how can we fix it? How can we move grading from an inaccurate accounting drill to something that is meaningful feedback? Here are some ideas for you to consider. On the left-hand side of this slide, I've listed what I've called toxic practices. Things like zeros for missing work. That's what accounts for more F's than anything else. And I realize you think that we ought to have consequences. So do I. I'm a parent. I'm a teacher. I want to have consequences. I just want to have consequences that matter. And the right consequence is not the zero. The right consequence is teaching work ethic and responsibility by having the kids do the work. I've had students of mine say, give me the zero, the operative word being give. And you know what? I won't do it. I make them do the work. That's not grade inflation. That is performance inflation. They work harder. They earn higher grades. Now, some of you use the average or the mean, and that's okay. But may I respectfully suggest that in your state, the state of everyone watching this film, that fourth graders know the difference between mean and median and mode, because fourth graders know that the mean, the average, is not always the best representation of the data set. Surely we can do better than that. In fact, what we can do is what you, when you are my graduate students, ask me to do. When you come into my stat and research class, you never want me to use the average between September and October when you're saying, oh, Doug, I can't remember this. It's been 30 years since I had an algebra class. You want me to evaluate you at the now I get it moment at the end of the semester. Now, if that's appropriate for you, why can't we do that for students? Our technology teachers don't evaluate every bug through the semester. They evaluate the program that works at the end. Our art teachers don't evaluate every flaw. They expect to give teachers and students feedback so that they can get better. Our athletic coaches don't decide who goes to the final championship by the average of scores, but who's performing best at the end. We can do the same. We don't have to use the average. We're better than that. And the semester killer. Now, you know what it is in your state. Every state has the semester killer, the big lab, the big project, 4 weeks of effort that ruin 18 weeks of a semester. We can teach students resilience. And resilience doesn't happen through punishments and threats. It happens through appropriate consequences. When work is not done, we do the work, respect teacher feedback. In fact, friends, maybe we ought to start thinking about rewards for getting work done early and appropriately, rather than so many punishments for work that is late and done wretchedly. Finally, let's consider the culture of achievement. When you think of school culture, what does it mean to you? Do you think of words the kids use, of their jewelry, of their appearance, of their boom boxes, of their poetry, of their language? What about culture that you can control? How many elements of school culture in your school are controlled by kids, and how many elements of school culture are controlled by you and your colleagues? Well, that question is at the center of the final two studies I want to share with you today. The first study comes from Professor Ronald Fryer, and it's a very provocative one. But because it deals with something that you, as the leaders and teachers of adolescence, think about every day, we need to take it seriously. Let me ask you this. Is student popularity among their peers important to your students? You bet it is. It's a psychic drug. They do anything for peer popularity. And that, unfortunately, is what Professor Fryer found. On the vertical axis, you see his measure of popularity. And on the horizontal axis, you see grade point average. Now let's explore what that means to different student cultural groups. The yellow line represents Anglo students. As their GPA gets higher, what happens to their popularity? It gets higher. Good for them. Psychic drugs. The blue line represents African American students, and they get more popular too as GPA gets higher, until 3.5. Then look what happens. After 3.5, as the GPA gets higher, popularity gets lower. What about Latino Hispanic students? They'll get more popular too, until about 2.3. Then, as GPA gets higher, popularity gets lower. Now, before you get mad at me for not having Asian students or Native students or other groups that were not in Professor Fryer's study, let me explain why. When you include groups with too small a sample size, you're not honoring those groups. You're in fact making an inappropriate generalization from the sample. I will tell you, however, that Arizona State University and other people with Native Nation populations have done similar research, and it's confirming what I'm about to say. And that is that one view of culture says external culture influences our kids' willingness to pursue high achievement. So we could stop right there, or we could look at one more study, which turns the findings of Fryer upside down, because now we're going to look at students several years before they come to us, starting in second grade. And here's what they found. Students come to school valuing achievement. In second grade, they ask them, who do you want to be like? 95, 96, 97% say, I want to be like high-achieving kids. No gender difference, no ethnic difference. Boys and girls, every color of the rainbow, wanted to be like high-achieving kids. And they stayed that way in third grade. They stayed that way in fourth grade. And yet, by seventh grade, we had choked it right out of them. In particular, males, African American males, Latino Hispanic males in particular, magnified by a factor of 6 the number of low-achieving peers that they wanted to be like. Now let me ask you, what's the difference between a second grade classroom and one in seventh grade? Maybe it would be useful to visit a second grade classroom, interview some second grade students and teachers. Think of your own second grade experiences. Second grade classrooms are a temple of achievement. There's art on the wall, there's poetry on the wall, there's essays on the wall, there's science and maps on the wall. My personal guidelines for second grade teachers is if you hadn't had a visit from the fire marshal about too much paper on the wall, you don't have enough work on the wall. It's a lovely, joyful temple of achievement, a great place to be. And yet the older they get, the work comes down. And by the time they're in middle school, what do we see? Maybe some rules. What do we see on the wall? Maybe some trophy cases. So here's the question. What's in the trophy case? Overwhelmingly, do your own count in your own school. Count the number of athletic trophies compared to everything else. And then tell me what your culture values. Now, I have no beef with athletics. I learn from coaches. I am a coach, and I believe in it. But friends, I work in schools where there are science projects in the trophy case, student musical compositions and artwork, and essays in the trophy case, because the trophy case is our statement of culture, saying what we value. And I want you to think about how we can make our middle schools look and feel like a temple of achievement so that there is no difference along the lines of ethnicity or gender. We have a lot to learn from our second grade colleagues when it comes to celebrating one another and what we do. So in summary, your expectations matter. I want you to focus not frantically on every standard, but on the power standards. I want you to think of grading as a form of feedback, not as punishment, not as an accounting drill. And finally, I want you to remember that you hold the key to your trophy case. You decide what culture is. I know that there are elements of culture outside of school that you and I find discouraging and may not be able to control. But the adults in your school, including you, hold the key to what we're going to value visibly. And we can decide if we're going to have a better culture of achievement in our school. In our next session, we're going to focus on effective assessment practices. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for listening.
You've just seen Dr. Douglas Reeves discuss rigor in the classroom, expectations, standards, and the culture of achievement. To find more information and additional resources on this and related topics, go to pubs.cde.ca.gov/TCS2.